Hello, everyone. This is Raphael.
I'm Lauren.
We're the Pacheco siblings, and welcome to the Hypercube podcast, a talk show in which two siblings converse about anything and everything. So, what were you saying?
I've been doing this thing recently with a lot of intention, and I don't know how long I've been doing it, but I've only recently put like a phrase to it. And I've realized what I've been doing is I've been trying to intentionally increase the quality of friends that I have. And that also means letting go of some old friendships that were of lesser quality, simply either by association or just like we just were in the same friend group. And I realized those weren't friendships or associations that were benefiting me, and like they just were. So I want to, like, something I've been doing is trying to surround myself with people of exceptional quality.
Well, I mean, but is there some implication there in your thought process that the purpose of relationships is to benefit you?
What I mean is that I have realized that the people that I have surrounded myself with are not people that I want to affect my life.
Right. So not necessarily that they need to be like pouring into you, but there should be some mutuality in such a way that I know the kind of person that I am, and I know we were talking about generosity before. I know the levels of generosity that I am privy to. I don't know, like, not to make myself seem less humble than I actually am, but the idea that a lot of these relationships are probably, when I say beneficial, I mean like every relationship, there's a push and a pull, there's a give and a take. There's always going to be something given in both directions, right? And some of the relationships that I've not held on to, but like have kind of just accumulated, I've realized there's been more give than take, or there's more give in my area, right? Like it feels like there's not much that I can gain from this kind of relationship that I couldn't get from a random stranger on the street. Right. I think I get what you're saying. I think I might disagree with some of your wording, but I think I take your point. Which, well, like, I mean, I'm
a lot more direct than you.
Yes. Well, I think perhaps like benefit isn't the right word, but I think you're talking maybe purely in terms of like health, right? Like not necessarily that you want benefits, but you want
I also want benefits.
Well, friends with benefits is an entirely different thing, but like
benefits. Okay, like we're talking about like connections, networking. I want to surround myself with people who are good at jobs, who are people who are professionals of a certain quality, with people who have
a certain degree of competence.
A certain degree of competence that I can feel comfortable trading with, right? I want friends, people who I consider to be close personally with, that I can also be close professionally with.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because, well, to catch everyone up, well, like if this does make it in the show, but before we started recording, we were talking about, I guess, just relationships. And I was talking about how I am trying to be more intentional about forging friendships in this new chapter of life, in this new location that I'm in. And
also in the context of politics.
Yes, also in the context of politics, insofar as we don't have a lot of in-person outlets, right, to have outside of, like, for me, like with my spouse. But again, I don't like the idea, and I don't think it's entirely healthy to put all of the pressure of like maintaining an entire other person's social life on a singular person, right? Absolutely. It doesn't matter if it's your spouse or not. It just shouldn't be down to a singular person. And so it's just like outside of my spouse, like I don't really have a good outlet for that kind of higher kind of intellectual engagement conversation in person. Obviously, there's you and I about once a week, but
maybe less since you've been busy.
Less than once a week nowadays. But that's like different, right? Because like it or not, like we're no longer in the same location. And I have come to accept the fact more so as time has gone on that there is a tangible, like moral difference, right, between the kind of social interactions you could have online and the kind of social interactions you could have in person. Like we are, like it is baked into my theology that we are designed to be embodied. And while I think technology is a great assistance in creating long distance social engagements that are real. They do have value and reality to them, right? I have to believe that. Like we like met our respective partners through long distance relationships. So it's like, if those were not real, then that would not be feasible. But that doesn't deny the reality that everything that we did do over a distance can be done better in person. And that is a tangible reality that, I mean, literally tangible, that cannot be ignored, is that like, that is just the way humans are designed to be. And in the long term, right, like relying on, I guess, technology and telecommunication is not the healthiest, right? You can't, that cannot be your sole outlet. Sorry,
can I make a argument / observation / recontextualization?
Sure.
Would you consider telecommunication to be a sort of a communications prosthetic?
Yeah, I think that can fit.
Something akin to a limb, but it is not quite the same.
Exactly.
But serves a purpose to fill in a gap that is missing in our life, which obviously is just like literally being able to talk farther than our voice can carry us.
Right.
Where in some cases, people have lost the ability to use a physical limb and is replaced by a prosthetic. In this case, we have not lost an ability, but we are gaining one by giving ourselves a prosthetic to be able to speak over a distance.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a fair and accurate representation. I like that. It's a prosthetic. But the thing is, right, like a prosthetic is never a goal. Well, at least depending on how post-human you are. But,
that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah. A prosthetic it should never be a goal, though, right? Like a prosthesis is something that it's like, you have it because you need it, right? But I don't think it's an end in and of itself. When it comes to relationships, I'm talking about, right? When it comes to like deep filling relationships, because I think it does expand our capabilities quite a bit, of course, obviously. And there's a lot of relationships and connections that are possible that would not otherwise be possible. And I think that's a beautiful and wonderful thing. However, I don't think it could be the only thing, right? I don't think a full and healthy life is reliant entirely on that. Even if a fair amount is, but it should never be entirely. And I think even when you forge deep relationships and connections across the kind of telecommunicative divide, I think that the end goals of those always move towards embodied interaction in some way, shape, or form, right? At some point. And I'm not saying that they need that in order to be valuable. I think they can be full of meaning and value prior to that, and perhaps even without that, if that never becomes feasible. However, I'm just talking in generalities about the human experience and about like what we are by design, in a sense, right? Which is embodied creatures that do life with other embodied creatures. And I don't know, there's still something more real to that. And I guess this is just, I bet, a correction for me, I should point out, right? Because I think for me, up until relatively recently, I would say that like a majority of my life was online. And, you know, I recognize as the older I get that that's not necessarily an ideal place to be, right?
And absolutely not.
And I think it's comfortable to be that way, but it's limiting. And
well, I think the problem is that it's not limiting. And that's where the problem lies. Well, the limitations are obviously the physical ones, where like you can't reach out and give somebody a hug. You can't touch the other person, but it's unlimited in the fact that even though you can't physically interact with these people, you can do essentially an equivalent of literally anything you wanted online. And that unlimited, that opportunity, that unlimited capability of the internet to just be anything you want it to be able to have these like kind of, you know, parasocial relationships with anybody online. You can just be, you know, peer-to-peer or with essentially like any influencer you choose to have these parasocial relationships. They can replace normal relationships because of the fact that in real life, you cannot be friends with JLo or whoever it is that you idolize, right? But you can online. You can talk to her online. You can interact with all of these accounts that anybody has and feel like you have this closer relationship when it is not in any way a real relationship or a close relationship, but you could feel like it is. And then that feels like, because of the nature of this other person that you're interacting with, it feels better than a real relationship with a real peer. Because, or maybe it doesn't have to feel better, but it feels the same at least, right? It's like, oh yeah, I talked to them, we have these conversations, they laughed at my joke that one time. But
I would argue that part of the unhealthy nature of it is that it can feel better, right? Because of the fact that those parasocial relationships make no demands of you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which all real relationships do.
It's not even.
It's not exactly. It's completely one-sided, and because you don't like have demands placed on you by the other party, because of the fact that you don't have boundaries placed on you by the other party, because of the fact that you don't have any kind of cost to your relationship, it can feel better without, but that comes like, I guess the hard lesson to learn, and that what I'm trying to get at, right, is that those things are all good and healthy parts of life and of any interaction with another human being, right? It is actually a good and desirable thing to basically not be parasitic in your relationship or one-sided in your relationship with another person, right? Like if you have a genuine connection or relationship with somebody, it should go both ways, right? It should place demands on you. It should place boundaries on what you can do. It should have all those things that is good and right and healthy. And because of the absence of those things, it can feel very freeing to have those in the kind of cyberspace, right?
Well, at that point, it's acting like a drug.
Exactly, right? And that's why it's possible to stay there indefinitely.
But yeah, absolutely. Like these parasocial relationships that you can develop online. And it's not just with people either. Like you can have parasocial relationships with like apps and like just like spaces online, right? Like essentially like forming addictions with content is all it comes down to. Like people become content, and that's not a good way to interact with the world. Right, because people are not when you expect somebody if you interact with people in real life the way that people interact with okay, well, hold on, I was about to make a metaphor, but I realized it actually happens, so I'll explain that. But if you interact with people in real life the way you interact with content, where it's just you show up, you say, I would like this please, and it just spills forward, and it's like it just gives you everything that you ever wanted with no question, with no ask for anything in return, and it just like is that way, then that's not like a real relationship. That's not something that you can sustain. Like that's completely draining of a person if you were to interact with them like content. And then I realized that's actually just like retail. Like if you were a retail worker, you realize what it's like to be content.
Right.
You're no longer a person. You are the thing that delivers them dopamine.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's why retail work is an inherently dehumanizing experience, really.
But I think that's the draw, is the fact that there's no demands placed on you, that you are the only one making demands, that you don't have to do too much. You have no effort. In some cases, it's even less than a click to get what you want, which is why this new generation is failing. Sorry, I got old for a second.
yeah, you turned into curmudgeon Lauren for a second. But okay, so now that we've got all that theory out of the way, right, and kind of posited the framework, I guess, that we're using for this conversation, right? Because it is basically just a framework, I think, where that I'm trying to construct here around our idea of relationships and what I don't want to say what it should look like, because we haven't really gotten into those weeds at all, but just like at the very least what it shouldn't be. And I think that's ultimately,
I think that's the only thing that we can really say.
That is true, because there's a myriad of ways in which relationships can be done right. And there are very specific ways in which it can be done wrong. And I feel like that word, I feel the term you used earlier is perfect for what I was trying to get at in my correction of your very blunt introduction, which was draining, right? Like I feel like that's basically what you're trying to avoid, is relationships that drain you, because it's one thing to give. Every relationship has give and take, and I think there's a difference between giving something and being drained of it, because if you're giving something willingly is something that builds you up, right? It feels great to give someone a gift.
That's true.
Right. And this is why scripture says it's more blessed to give than to receive. It really is something that at a base fundamental human level, to be able to give something as a gift feels great. It fills you with positive energy. But yeah, to have it taken away from you or drained is a completely different feeling.
I think there's like a proverb or something that says a gift is something both parties receive.
Yes, for sure.
Something like that.
For sure.
It's the kind of thing where in a healthy relationship, it's not that it should always feel good, because like that's just not a healthy expectation for anything. There's always going to be ups and downs, but it should never feel effort to receive that good feeling. Like, okay, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. Like, it shouldn't feel like you have to put in more effort to get something out of the relationship than what you receive. Giving should be in itself something that you feel good about. And then so therefore it elevates the relationship, as opposed to like, now I've got to go do something to get that feeling. I've got to go out and do work to get this feeling, right? It should never feel like that.
Right. It should never be a chore. And
it should never, yes, it is. It should never be a chore. It should be something like you're looking forward to doing. Like, oh yes, I get to give this person something. As opposed to, dang it, I have to go do it now.
Exactly. Right. That's a strong difference. And I think that's also just a red flag for where a relationship is becoming broken. And it's especially prevalent in abusive relationships is right. When it takes a massive exertion of energy in order to do that good thing for that person, where it's burdensome to do a good thing for that person. And when it's coerced, right, to do a good thing for that person. And oftentimes, especially for relationships that perhaps start out wholesome and don't end that way, oftentimes that transition is so slow that a person doesn't notice that they've changed into that mode, right? Because it's just like, I remember within living memory enjoying giving things to this person. That is no longer the case, but I haven't noticed that transition has happened, right? I haven't noticed that I've crossed that Rubicon where I'm being drained. And it feels like not a responsibility, because again, responsibilities can and should be good things. It feels like a burden.
An obligation, rather.
Obligation, exactly.
Give me one moment, because I just realized that my microphone is on omnidirectional, not on cardioid. I think that was from streaming.
Probably.
Leftover from streaming. So 20 minutes in, and you're going to hear a decidedly different microphone quality from me.
Just bass boosted 20 minutes in.
Boom. I have arrived.
Oh, dang.
Mother, I have arrived.
That's a deep cut. But that's a deep cut that I will not explain, too.
No explanation. You get nothing. You get to just ponder that for a moment.
Okay, yeah. Yes, so I feel like we've gotten our framework here. But that being said, we were talking specifically pre-stream about being deliberate and intentional in how we're developing our relationships nowadays. And I guess that's just something we were talking about. What were you saying about it?
Well, I was saying like I'm deliberately trying to increase the quality of friends that I have, and I mean quality in like every aspect, right? So it's like I want somebody to be okay. This is a low bar, but I want somebody to at least be a peer to me in terms of like.
I completely hear you. If I could build off of that, because that is something I've kind of recognized as well. And again, kind of having a reboot in life and entering a new chapter is a great opportunity to kind of reassess these things. And I feel like we've both been doing a fair amount of that. And I think that is a huge problem that I've encountered before. And I'm not saying that every relationship you have needs to be with someone who is a peer or an equal. I don't believe that at all. But I do also recognize that there is a degree to which that need has been underserved in my life, right? Is to have peers. And what by peer, I think we both know what we mean by that, but just to elaborate for the sake of the podcast audience, like somebody with whom you share just something, right? Like it could be interests, abilities, careers, any number of things, right? Someone with whom you share some sort of path and to whom you feel like you're like coexistent with rather than having two separate existences.
It's mostly that I want to find somebody who is at the same level on their path as I am, right? Because I think when it comes down to me, is I think far too often a lot of these relationships have formed because I have been a mentor to people. And that is not something that I want to continue to do for the rest of my life. I want to, if I'm going to be a mentor, it's going to be probably one person. I'm going to find one person to mentor and they're going to be the best. But I've found that I've formed friendships based on the fact that I have been freely giving my time as a mentor to anybody who will listen to me. And that has helped me grow as a teacher and as somebody who loves just learning and learning things. And I love being able to teach these things that I have learned. And also it makes you a better learner to teach. That's good and all, but that can't be the reason I form relationships. Mm-hmm. And so I want somebody for whom I don't have to teach. I want somebody who I can just interact with and talk to things and just say like, oh yeah, like here's this thing that I've observed. And they go, oh yes, there's also a thing that I have observed. And I go, oh, I don't have to teach you it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and okay, so this gets into a whole conversation I've been having recently with Haley, but like I hear you 100%. And I definitely think that's again, a need that's been underserved in our particular lives, because I think we have a fair amount of similar experience on that end, perhaps simultaneously, but it's definitely something I've observed. And what I really feel desperate to find, there's this book I want to get. The book isn't what I'm desperate to find. This is just to clarify.
Desperate to find. It's $10 at Walmart.
Yeah, $10 at Walmart to fill that hole in your heart. But
oh man, that's deep.
Yeah, too real. But this is just kind of, bear with me. This is just an illustration. But they recently, I heard about this book, and they recently interviewed the author on the Holy Post podcast, which is a podcast I listen to very, very regularly. And it makes me want to get even more. It's there's someone who makes like spiritual nonfiction comics, like, and they're really hard to categorize their work because they you don't have a graphic nonfiction section at Barnes and Noble. And so they called them graphic novels as a compromise, but the author has made it clear that it is their intention that they be understood as graphic nonfiction. And he did a book recently.
Are these like documentaries or more like essays, I should say?
Kinda. I mean, just like a regular kind of nonfiction book, right? Like I'm not sure if you have a lot of familiarity with like spiritual.
I don't read a lot of nonfiction,
but it's
like self-help books or explanation books or something like that, like just diving into a topic, just
subject books, right? Like on a particular person or topic or history or what have you.
Okay, subject books, that makes more sense.
Yeah. And so I
don't read a lot. I don't read a lot of books. That's fair.
Not a lot of books. I guess is the clarification.
I do read a lot. I read a ton. I read way too much. Not a lot of books. I don't read a lot of bound literature.
But that being said, they did a book recently called The Mythmakers, and it's about the relationship between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and how it kind of
fantastic, man.
Yeah, and how it kind of changed history.
I would look at a book like that.
Yes, for sure, and in graphic format, right?
Exactly,
it's in comic book format, which is really cool. And just hearing him talk on the podcast and the Holy Post as well, like really made me even more enamored to read this, because he had really just such high ideas of what the comic medium can be, and can talk at a very theoretical level about the interaction between word and image, and how those things, when put together, form a gestalt whole that is different than their composite parts. Anyway, it's just the theoretical stuff that I love, and he just like really got into that, and I'm like, yes. But that being said, yeah, that whole relationship is fascinating. But what I've really found, and what I kind of confessed to Haley recently, is that is something I feel like I've been missing, right? I don't have my Tolkien to my Lewis, right? Yeah. These were like two friends who were also, they were best friends, who were peers, and who very much operated at a similar sort of level, and just got there, right? Like independently. They didn't know each other until they were both like adults. And yet they found this deep kinship because of the commonality of their experiences, as well as just the number of common interests and like work level that they were at. And
just the sheer amount of wrinkles in their brains.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that too. Because they had so many common experiences. They both fought in World War I, and they were like worldview different when they met, because Lewis was an atheist when he met Tolkien, and Tolkien has always been a devout Catholic since he came out of the womb.
Hardcore Catholic.
Yeah. But like Tolkien, in many ways, they created each other, is one thing that the author observed. And I just hadn't thought of it in those terms before, because we remember like Lewis as like this great, just apologetic Christian intellectual powerhouse. And we remember Tolkien as like this famous author and world builder. And yet it was Tolkien who played a pivotal role in converting Lewis to Christianity. And it was Lewis who told Tolkien for the first time that he should publish his work. And so it's like, in many ways, they created each other. But it's just like that kind of deep reciprocal friendship that they had. And just hearing any description of it just like makes me salivate with desire for what they had of these two like men. And it's like, this is particularly rare among men for a lot of social and cultural reasons.
At least currently.
Well, historically as well. Currently, if anything, it's been better than it's ever been in times past, at least in the West. But it's just like, right, like that's such a rare and extraordinary thing. And yes, it had its ups and downs, but it also, as any relationship does, but it's still, it's exceptional what they had. And I'm kind of hungry for that, you know? I'm desperate for those kinds of deep kinship with people that you have, where you could just like pick it up like that into conversation and they understand your language. Yeah, like I said, I think we've both been very intentional about trying to forge new relationships like that. And thankfully, I feel like there's some hope for that. I definitely feel like I've been making some good friends that I even though these relationships are burgeoning, I do hope I can find something like that, because like you said, we've always had that together, but for better or for worse, like we're not embodied with each other anymore. And we do need to find people with which we could have that face-to-face interaction at that same level.
And I guess I should give myself, I should correct myself a little bit, because I think what you demonstrated in that story is something that I was trying to get at, is that it's not that I'm not trying to find somebody who I can't teach, because that's never going to happen. There's always going to be learning happening, right? But I think it's more so the fact that I want to find somebody who can teach me as much as I can teach them, right? Where even if it's, because like, especially, I don't want to find somebody who is just me. Like, I can look in the mirror and get good intellectual conversation, but that's not going to go anywhere. The idea is, being a mentor was too one-sided as a relationship. And I want somebody who I don't have to mentor, but somebody that I can experience learning with mutually.
Yes, for sure. Well, and I think mentor relationships can be extraordinarily valuable for both parties within certain parameters, right?
Like with boundaries.
Yes, with boundaries. Especially, I think those are very valuable when they're entered into intentionally and explicitly. Yes. Right? Where you enter into it and say, this is a mentor-pupil relationship, and that's going to be what it's going to be. So let's define those terms, right? Yeah. And when that happens, they can be very life-giving, I have found. And that's why I think institutions are also incredibly important, because oftentimes it's institutions that give frameworks for those relationships to happen with intentionality, and provide environments for them, right, for those connections to be made. I think that's one incredibly valuable gift that institutional life gives us, and why I feel like the kind of death of the institution is a bit of a modern tragedy, or at least the death of the trust in institutions. Because we do still need them, and I do still think they're just they have a rightful place in civic and social life, and I just think we need a way to reclaim them healthily. Because yes, there is a lot of skepticism about that stuff, and for good reason in this day and age. But that's still a need. That's still a need that people have, because those kinds of relationships are still a need that people have. But that being said, yeah, I do think there are circumstances in which that can be good. It's just that hasn't been our experience, right? Because that's not the way they were entered into. They weren't entered into with intention. They're entered into with like,
because to be frank, we didn't know what we were doing.
Fair, but also, yeah, when you think you're going into a friendship and you're not, right? That's when that's when it's bad.
Yeah. There's too many relationships that I had that were based entirely on the fact that I had something the other person needed, and the entire relationship was based on that, right?
Yes, for sure.
And even better, if I can get somebody who was me for other people, if I can get me a mentor, that would be next level.
Yes, for sure, right? And
I want to be friends with them.
No, that's for sure. That's for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've had mentor relationships before, but like at this current point that I'm at in my life, I am at a bit of a point and I don't know if I'll cut this in or not, this might be a little personal, but where I do actually have a great desire for mentorship, but it's like impossible to find, right? Like I have not found a person where it's just like, I feel like I can submit myself to your authority, right? And a part of that, because there's always like multiple components to it, right? Because they need to be a great synthesis of character and knowledge, right? And it seems rare to find somebody that has both for us. You know what I mean? Where it's just like, I can trust your character and I know you know more than me about the subject that I need mentorship on, right? And there have been transient points where it's like I've gotten that, but it's like not as like an ongoing relationship where that is defined as our pattern. But I don't know.
I'm at a point where I miss the feeling of being a student. Like I miss the feeling of just like being given something that I am required to learn in an amount of time. Mm-hmm. As opposed to like what I do right now, which is just like, you know, passively learning as much as I can and like just constantly finding something new to wrap my head around. Being able to focus on a subject and having somebody who's an expert in that subject give me guidance. It's just the kind of thing I don't have right now. And I would love to have that kind of experience.
Yeah, I feel like we all need somebody who can challenge us. And yeah, it can be difficult when that feels like it's lacking, right? Because you kind of end up in this sort of cruise control stupor, you know, where you don't feel like you can make substantial advancements in your development.
It's especially hard for me when this is like a kind of like humble brag, where I've always been a naturally talented individual where I am very good at things I pick up for the first time. Mm-hmm. And it's been a real problem for me being good at everything. You have to understand. You don't understand the struggle. But no, it's like it is a problem because
weight of massive talent.
Really. But no, it's a problem because I've realized that has let me down when it comes to learning things like over time, because I've never had to go more than like, I don't know, a few weeks or a few months to really pick up on the basics of something. And like really kind of understand why something is the way that it works, or to like be able to do certain things, especially like with my body, like learning how to do tricks or copy a martial art or anything like that for one of our like action shorts. That was always something I was able to do pretty quickly, and just like pick up something like, oh, that's a cool trick. I want to learn how to do that, and then figure it out. And it's like, okay, now we're going to do it on film, and then do it. That was kind of just like the pattern of how I learn things. And it's never been drill it for 1,000 times until I get it right. Well, as Bruce Lee famously said, like, I don't fear the man who's thrown 1,000 punches once. I fear the man who's thrown one punch 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm. Might have been kicks. Not sure.
Or 1,000 strikes. Let's just let's generalize here.
Yeah.
That's where I've realized that I've really failed as a learner, or as not necessarily failed, but as something that I lack as somebody who categorizes themselves as a chronic learner. Is I don't learn things beyond just a general basic understanding of it, like going into mastery. Classic, right? Jack of all trades, master of none.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's and I pride myself with being a jack of all trades, but there's that missing bit of experience where just like I would love to have somebody who's really an expert in something, and probably is going to end up being martial arts. Like if we're being realistic, it's going to probably end up being martial art. Who's really an expert in something, just slap some humility into me.
You're like, I need it.
I really do. And it sucks because I haven't found it yet.
That is like the most like hubris thought of just like, it's a tragedy. I might actually be the best. That sounds like an anime plot.
That needs to be okay. No, that's literally One Punch Man, right? But
yeah, that's fair. He's getting depressed because he can't find somebody to challenge him.
Yeah. Oh, I am Saitama. No. But going back to what we're talking about, relationships, I have realized, maybe unconsciously or otherwise, I think I have been surrounding myself with people who are of a, I don't want to say of a lesser quality. Like I've been surrounding myself with people who are not as far along in their journey as I am, right? Mm-hmm. Either because I wanted that kind of approval. I wanted to be that person who just is the one who knows everything, who is the best in the room at any given time. And so what I've done is filled that room with people who are not as good as me. And I realized that's not healthy. It's not a good way to improve as a person. So what I want to do is to fill the room with people who are either as good as or better than me. I want to form relationships with people who are going to challenge me and be able to give me the thing that I've always wanted in my life, which is to be challenged, to be able to put effort into something and like have that give me just energy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because
for sure.
Things have always come easy to me, and I've realized that has made me in some kind of way, it has made me a little bit lazy, and I don't like that.
Right, and I think there's a certain lethargy, right? I think the kind of word I would use to describe the mode that you're talking about, right? You get into this kind of complacent lethargy where you're not being challenged and you're not being, and I know it's really difficult for us because like we're kind of trying to beat around the bush in a way that we probably wouldn't if we were not recording this, but like, because it's hard to not put it in like these, like the way our language is constructed, right? To put it in like in superiority, inferiority terms.
Yeah.
Because like, I noticed you're like trying really hard to avoid using those, but it's just like,
oh, actually,
I'm trying to figure out what better language for it is, because we're not necessarily saying that these are like, where we're talking about like worse or better human beings.
Yeah.
But it's just
like I said, people who are further or not as far along a certain path, right?
Right.
Here's an easy way. Let's just talk about fitness. I have always surrounded myself with people who are physically weaker than I am. And I think that's a problem.
Right. That is something that you can measure, right? Like that is not a, I mean, well, I don't know. A lot of people get all up in arms about body shaming these days, but it's like, that's not an insult to say, right? Like generally
like that's just an observational fact. I can deadlift more than you. That is completely observable. And I think let's use that from now on. Physical fitness, but let's understand that as a metaphor for my entire life.
Fitness as a metaphor for life. Well, and
I was born buff. I wasn't actually.
No, very much so.
But I was so skinny in high school.
It's weird to look back on because like, I don't know, that change happened very gradually and then suddenly. It was like bankruptcy. But it's
You're calling my muscles bankrupt?
In the best possible way, yes. But it's that's a good metaphor but to use, but with the understanding of, because again, this is just a failure of the English language that we don't have good terminology for this. But yeah, with the understanding that there is like a level of development in all areas of life, right? All areas of life are areas in which humans can develop, right? Be it physically, mentally, or on specific skills or subject matters. And yeah, like there is a danger that happens when you are constantly surrounded by people who are underdeveloped on the areas that you share, whatever they may be, right? Like personal, mental, emotional, physical, or again, on specific skills or subjects. Like whatever it is that you share, right? Whatever it is that is the basis of your relationships or just, the basis of your conversations, like that there is a noticeable gap in development. Like there is a certain point at which that holds you back. And in a way, having people who are at equal or greater development is not only good for challenging you as a person, but in many ways, it's what enables you to have those relationships with people who are less developed and have them be healthy, right? Because you're not relying on that as your like only friendship, right? Because it's possible that person can fill in other gaps that people who are equal or better developed in your kind of concentric circles can't. That is entirely possible, but it's difficult for you to see when you're constantly feeling drained. And in many ways, like having more balance can make all of your relationships healthier, no matter which direction they're pulling you in, because you do still have people who are challenging you and pulling you forward.
And having somebody who is a peer or greater than you in any particular aspect gives you a frame of reference to model your behavior to people who are also below you in that development like level. Like if you find somebody who is your superior, your whatever, putting yourself in that position you can realize like, oh, like this is how I talk to people. Maybe they don't feel so good because that didn't feel good when they did it to me, or maybe this is how they talk to other people and that makes them feel really good. So maybe I should emulate that talking to people who are who I am mentoring. Right? It gives you that frame of reference, that experience of being on that end of the mentor student relationship, or just being somebody who is further along in their development. It really does suck. Somebody who's stronger.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'll say like on my end as well. Again, I'm not sure how much of this I'm going to keep because like, so some of this might not be appropriate for podcast conversation, but this is why we edit these things. We can talk freely. But yeah, like for me personally, like I've been on a bit of a journey of meaning with regard to like the church. Because I mean, that's been ongoing in many ways for a while as part of my kind of deconstruction process, or I prefer the term disentangling because deconstruction is kind of a loaded term for a lot of people. It's not necessarily for me, but as a concession to the people for whom it is loaded, I do prefer to use the term disentangling because it's not about like a kind of destruction of faith, but just understanding it in a more holistic sense. And so, with regards to the church, right, like the body of believers, the community, I do believe that's a good and necessary things, but I think my ideas about what church should be like have kind of evolved. And sometimes
I think we talked about that in a previous episode.
Yeah, I think we've made brief mention of it. And it's just, I guess I'm at a crossroads where I'm trying to figure out where I fit in that picture, right? Because I know that I need the body of Christ. I know that I need believers that I can do life with. I'm just not sure how to get that in a meaningful way anymore because I believe in the power of institutions. I've talked about that, but like, and all institutions are compromised at a certain level, right? In a fallen world, there is no perfect one, even the church. However, because like I'm faced with an interesting crossroads where since moving here, we've kind of gotten integrated with a church. And I love this church. It's great. It's a bigger church than I'm used to, but it's great.
It's the South. You're going to get used to it.
I mean, not just the South. It's just like it's a city church, basically, I think is more so the dynamic, right? Whereas coming from like 10 years serving in a small town church, completely different vibe, right? Like I could name everybody at my old church that I was serving at for 10 years. Whereas like here, like not possible, right? It's not
like
possible to...
I don't know if you remember our old churches back in San Diego. Like
kind of like more of those. Yeah, like same sort of thing, right? Non-denom, mega churches, that same sort of vibe, but like really great church, really friendly people, really great teaching, and just massive in scale by comparison to what I'm used to. But that being said, right, like as far as I've made compromises to be a part of a church before, at a certain level, you have to. And the number of compromises I have to make to stay here are way smaller than the compromises I've made before.
Really?
And oh yeah, for sure. Like I'm just like I have my share of issues, but it's just like it's just like way less than anything I've had to do before. Like especially with regard to like politics and stuff, there's just simply a better balance, or at least seemingly, right? At least coming from the pulpit on down, right? Interpersonally, that can vary, but like the institutionally, right? I think there's a lot of great things about this, and yet I am still conflicted because I'm also seeing issues that are systemic issues with just the way church is conducted here in the West, and I just don't know, right? Like I don't know. Even though I have to make even though I've made way worse compromises to be a part of a church, I just don't know if this is something that is advancing me in the way that I need with the understanding that I have now. Because it's like, I want to spiritually develop and I want close Christian community, but it's just, again, the systems just aren't designed for that. And yes, there's like small groups and stuff, but there's, and I think small groups are really where the future of the church is at. And I love that even big churches like this have those. However, then there's the issue of like finding your placement in one, because like one that we've kind of been recommended towards is like, there's one that's been starting up for like young married couples. And we considered that for a while, but like ultimately Haley and I are also just kind of like, that's really not ultimately a core identity for us. It's like, don't get me wrong, our marriage is incredibly central and important to us. However, I do not generally relate to people just because they are husbands, right? In the same way that she also said the same thing, right? She generally doesn't like relate to people just because they're wives. And yes, you'll have a lot of common experiences with them, but it's very quickly becomes apparent for us, especially, that it takes more than that for us to relate to people and to feel like we're really peers with people, because we had some of those interactions with like some of those people in that group where it's just like you start talking about like all the things we do. And it's kind of like you were talking about with like some people at work where it's just like, oh man, y'all do so much and this is so crazy. That's incredible. And it's just like, like you said, it feels like a very unbalanced interaction where you're like, oh, well, I feel like I'm intimidating you at this point, you know? Yeah, and that's not what my intention is. I want to have find my people in a small group with whom I can interact and with whom like I don't stand out, right? Like that's what I want, is I want to find the people who I could talk about, have deep conversations intellectually, artistically, whatever, creatively, whatever it may be, and just share that peer to peer, right? Be like, I'm not special talking about that. That's the people I want to find.
Absolutely. That's, I think, I don't know about you, but especially with my very rebellious early, not childhood, but whatever comes after childhood to adulthood.
Adolescence.
That's the word. My very rebellious, very loud, kind of in your face, look at me, I want attention childhood or adolescence. I think I've been over that for a long time now, and I haven't realized it. I think it's a problem. So I think I've realized I don't want that kind of attention anymore. I'm tired of being constantly in the spotlight. So now I just kind of want to blend into the background and just be another voice. But the problem is what we talked about before with the with early development of just like conditioned to be excellent, where very early on I was very good at a lot of things. So now at this level in my life, I have to find people with whom I can blend in with at my age, and I'm finding that to be very difficult.
Yeah. And that's part of the issue. I think it really does stem. The more this conversation has gone on, the more I've realized that it does relate to our episode on Condition for Excellence, which if you haven't seen that episode, I'll link to it in the show notes. It is, I think, a pretty foundational conversation for understanding, I think, our personal history and us as people.
Yeah.
And I think it is definitely one of the kind of seminal episodes of Hypercube podcast, in my opinion. Like, if I dare say, because it's
required reading.
It is very much us opening up, right, about like our a lot of our own personal histories and traumas, and how, I mean, we don't open up specifically on the traumas, but like how that informs the way we have been shaped to think about the world. And a lot of this just stems from the same things we diagnosed in that episode, right? Which is like, from an early age, we were conditioned to have this kind of drive and these kinds of standards. And part of that might have been that like adolescent attention seeking of just like wanting to stand out in that age, right? Like when we were that age, we wanted to stand out. We wanted to be a cut above the rest.
Yeah.
Because
if you saw me at 13, I had more piercings than I have now. That's like not necessarily healthy.
Right.
I stood out like crazy.
Yeah, for sure. And so, but in now entirely different ways, right? We still stand out. And so, and a lot of that was because we needed that, right? We needed that validation. There was something that was missing in us that required that kind of external validation to stand out, to have some form of excellence. And if not excellence, just sheer weirdness, right? Of just like wanting to stand out visually.
Yeah, that was me.
And there was all of that. But you know, we've psychologically, retroactively like diagnosed that. We recognize that in our younger selves. Yeah. And I think in many ways for me, like that void has been filled, right? I don't need that kind of validation anymore, not to the same degree anyway. And I know there's always going to be a part of me that is still that hurting child, but it's not a need, because I have that need filled. I found it filled spiritually and relationally now. And it's, which, you know, are kind of one and the same for me as well. But like at a more social level, I have seen a greater filling of that void as time has gone on. And because of that, it's like, what then do you do with the excellence, right? Because you still are at that point where it's just like, yes, you do stand out in a normal crowd. How do you find your peers, right? How do you find your people? How do you find the people with whom you can share life, who you don't need to validate you, that you just want to enjoy life with at the stage that you are at? And in some ways, like oftentimes, like I wish I could just resign myself to being just a complete normie. You know, there's some days where I wish it's just like I could be like completely thoughtless about politics, you know, not have any strong opinions, and not necessarily not have strong opinions, but be able to conform to the strong opinions that the tide goes with, and to be able to like not think critically about art. That would be such a convenient life to have. You would be so happy for so long. But it's
the bliss of ignorance.
Yes. But it's just like, I can't live like that, right? Like I've crossed the point where I can, that is something I can revert to. And so what then do? You just got to find people with whom you don't feel alienated, right? With whom you don't feel that there is some sort of separation there, that you can just talk to openly as yourself, as a peer, and just have connection. And again, in some ways that enables all the rest of the connections, because it's still good to have connections outside of that. Those are still good and healthy for you, but they can be difficult and stressing if they are the only ones that are available to you. And so in many ways you need that in order to balance the rest. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. That's how I'm kind of thinking through it in this moment, at least.
I brought up the bliss of ignorance, and I was reminded when I said that of the opposite of the bliss of ignorance, like, but the completion of that is right, like the tail to the opposite side of the coin to that. It's the curse of knowledge, and I believe that's what we've been afflicted with. Unfortunately, is we've been cursed with this gift that has alienated us from a lot of the people who are supposed to be at our same like developmental level. But it's not that they are underdeveloped; it's that we are overdeveloped, and it's that we have put ourselves in a situation where maybe overdeveloped in some areas, right? In many areas, but then because of that, we were underdeveloped in others. So then because of this, we're now finding ourselves at this weird intersection of experience where we don't have the peer group that we should have at this time because of the fact that we are at a different level of development that we should be. Well, heavy air quotes, should be, right?
Right. But, just based on like the typical demographics, right? Of age, location, all that stuff, right? And you know what you're talking about?
What's up?
We're talking about Good Will Hunting. Dang it! Good movie. I really want to rewatch that again now that we've had some more of these conversations, because the older I've gotten, the more I see our story in that film, right? Not that we're like that same level of genius. Obviously, that was like savant levels, right? But it's and not that we have that level of trauma either, right? Like I think that is a good example of a character that in some ways they abstract the character to being relatable with the extent to which you can alienate him from audiences, right? Because that is like the highest form of like genius coupled with like the highest forms of trauma, right? And so like, but still the base story that underlies that, right, is something that I still see, right, in a lot of our journey. And so I don't know, that's a film I've been wanting to rewatch because of that. Because that is a very, very connected film, and I think there's a reason it really resonated with me, even if I haven't really been able to understand it until more recently.
One of the things I like talking about that film, just completely aside, is that's one of the few films that I can think of where they actually left a blooper in the film because it was funnier than reshooting the scene when Robin Williams is going completely off script and improvising something in the therapy session, and literally everybody on set was laughing, even the cameraman, and you can see the camera shaking in the final cut of the scene of the film. Completely off script. Robin just doing his thing. Cameraman's literally laughing his butt off, and the camera is shaking. And Matt Damon breaks character, and he's just laughing his butt off on the therapist couch, and they just left it all in.
Yeah. Or placed it all in, because that's how film works.
Well, true, but like I'm sure they went back and shot that scene a few more times.
That's
right?
fair.
I'm sure that's the version of the scene that they kept in.
That is true. I'm sure they've got a version of the scene that is purely the sides, and that is completely fair. But it's like
anyways, just completely aside.
Complete aside. Great anecdote.
Yeah.
So we just need to find our Robin Williams, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think everybody needs a Robin Williams in their life, man.
That's deep, but very true. Okay, that seems like a good spot to wipe down. Thank you all very much for listening to us work through existential crises.
Welcome to Therapy Session, episode number 44.
Enjoy your therapy. Thank you all very much for listening. This has been the Hypercube podcast. This show is mixed and edited by Raphael Pacheco, with original theme music by Mono Memory. Until next time, we'll see y'all later. God bless.
Stole my line.